Hi there, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on this Monday. Tonight, Canada-U.S. relations go from bad to worse.
I'd rather have no deal than a terrible deal.
Have you had any contact with President Trump since Thursday?
I have not.
I don't want to meet with him. No, I'm not going to be meeting with him for a while.
Trade talks halted, new tariffs threatened, and no interest from the White House in getting back to the table. That's the state of play at this hour on the Canada-U.S. file that's rocked our entire economy. In moments, we'll talk to Jobs Minister Patty Hajdu about that and her government's message to workers who are worried about losing their jobs. Then, the blame game.
Canada burnt the bridges with America. Donald Trump did not slam the door.
That's Donald Trump's representative in Canada claiming it's all our fault. How did we get here and how do we dig our way out? Our front bench with Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie is set to tackle those questions coming up. Plus, Alberta is set to force teachers back to work. Our eyes are on the Alberta legislature this hour, where Premier Danielle Smith is soon expected to force an end to the teacher strike in her province. We're going to bring you that breaking news as soon as it happens. First, though, we're going to start tonight with a week that's gone from bad to worse on the trade front. Canada-U.S. trade talks are terminated, according to Donald Trump, who says new tariffs are coming. And now his ambassador to this country is digging in hard, blaming Canada for burning bridges with the U.S. and even leveling an accusation of attempted elections interference after an Ontario anti-tariff ad that used video of Ronald Reagan warning against protectionism ran during the World Series this weekend. Have a listen to Ambassador Pete Huckstra, who made the comment speaking virtually at a manufacturers conference this afternoon.
Canada burnt the bridges with America. Donald Trump did not slam the door. Donald Trump could do the only thing that a leader of a sovereign nation could do when a neighbor, another sovereign nation, decided to interject itself into American politics. Canada slammed that door shut all by itself. They didn't need Donald Trump's help to close that door.
Now, the ambassador also indicated he had heard indications a deal could be reached by American Thanksgiving at the end of November. He now says it's unlikely a trade deal with Canada will be reached until the new year. Ontario's ads ran over the weekend, but Premier Doug Ford pulled them as of today. He says they did what they were supposed to, and he's standing by the decision to run them in the first place.
We achieved our goal. As we say, mission accomplished. It was done. They're talking about it in the U.S., and they weren't talking about it before I put the ad on. If it wasn't the ad, he'd look out the door or the window, President Trump, and say, oh, the leaves have turned color. Let's stop. Believe me, President Trump is not putting a deal together to benefit Canada. It's our job. It's the Prime Minister's job to get a deal that benefits all of Canada. It's not about the ad. It's about finding every excuse in the world not to get a deal.
On the other side of the world, in Kuala Lumpur, Prime Minister Mark Carney insisted progress was being made on finding some relief for affected sectors like steel and aluminum, up until, he says, that ad aired and angered Trump. And the two leaders have no plans to meet to hash anything out.
Look, we stand ready to sit down with the United States, myself with the President, my colleagues with their colleagues, when the U.S. is ready to sit down. We had made considerable progress on a supplement to the trading relationship that we had, considerable progress in the areas of steel, aluminum, and energy associated areas as well.
Whether it's provincial or Canada itself, they all knew exactly what the ad was. The Prime Minister knew, everybody knew. The Prime Minister knew what the ad was before I went.
Will you see him in APEC? Do you want to meet with him?
I don't want to meet with him. No, I'm not going to be meeting with him for a while. No. I'm very happy with the deal we have right now with Canada. We're going to let it ride.
The Prime Minister also said Canadians can expect more details in next week's federal budget on how his government will address the immense economic uncertainty the trade war has created. And in the continuing trickle of pre-budget announcement, we learned this morning that the budget will also include millions of dollars for job training and a new tax credit for personal support workers. Patty Hajdu is the Minister of Jobs and Families. Hi, Minister Heidi. Welcome to studio. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks, Vashi.
It's a pleasure to see you as always. I have a number of questions on the announcement today, but I have to start where I think Canadians are at the moment, which is a lot of anxiety about what we've heard over the last number of days from the U.S. president. He has announced additional tariffs, an additional 10%, I should say, on the ones that exist. Do you have any knowledge as a cabinet minister of when those will actually be applied?
Well, I think the details are unclear, actually. To us as a cabinet, but certainly in the comments that the president made. And that's why the work that we're doing on Budget 2025 and the investments we're making in the Canadian economy are so important, because we can't actually control what the U.S. will do, but we have to take this moment to really focus on what Canadians are asking us to do, which is to focus on their success, to focus on the investments, generational investments into our economy, and to make sure that Canadians of all ages are well supported through this time.
And I certainly do take the point that we can't control what Donald Trump does, but we are still in a very vulnerable position because so much of what we export does continue to go to the United States. And I know that your focus is on measures that can help buttress the economy, and I do have a number of questions on that in a moment. But like I said, I think Canadians have a lot of anxiety at this moment about the degree to which we are vulnerable. And while we may not be able to control Donald Trump, we can control our response. Is Canada going to do anything differently? You know, the Prime Minister said now's the time to talk, not to fight back. The auto sector in particular is asking, union leaders, many of whom you're in constant contact with, asking for a more forceful response from your government. Is that coming?
Well, I think we've been taking increasingly forceful responses all along, including, for example, changing procurement so that we can buy Canadian and have a better Canadian supply chain for all of the things that we're building. But what I would say is that the Prime Minister is not waiting to take action. He's at APEC, as you know, this week. That we have been extensively working on looking for new markets for Canadian products and services, and ensuring that we invest in the kinds of things that are going to create those great jobs of today and tomorrow. So I would say this, there is deep anxiety amongst the Canadian population, but there is a determination amongst Canadians that I continue to see. But whether it's in my own community at the grocery store, as people are coming up to me and talking about what just happened in the last 24 hours, or whether it's with unions who are talking about what they're planning to do to support their members and to be ready for the projects that are coming in their community, some underway already, the Canadians are a determined lot, and they're united.
Respectfully, I would challenge the idea that your government's response has been more forceful as it evolves. I think the impression Canadians have is that you campaigned on a forceful response, and that is not what's being delivered right now. And I'll point to, for example, removing the DST, not matching counter tariffs to the tariffs that are applied by the United States, not anywhere close on the sectors that are being hit. Even the procurement agency that you mentioned, I interviewed the minister who's spearheading that, and he couldn't tell me how the balance would shift from 70 cents on the dollar spent in the United States towards Canada or elsewhere. He didn't have specific numbers at all. So once again, does the federal government plan on responding more forcefully to this latest blow from Donald Trump?
What I would say is that, with due respect, Canadians have been in an extraordinary way pulling together, and they have been saying, we respect the leadership of the Prime Minister, we respect the steady hand that he has on the situation, and they want us to be responding in a measured way that protects their interests, that invests in the kinds of things that they need to have confidence for not just their generation but the next, and to be the adults in the room and remain calm even when things change. And as the Prime Minister has said, and I think Canadians understand this, there's things that we cannot control, but there are things that we can. And what I've been hearing, as I said, in my own community when I meet with stakeholders, is that people feel that we are listening, we're working with partners, we're strengthening the fabric of communities by investing in Canadians, by making sure that we keep solid the programs that Canadians rely on, but also focusing on new trading partners and involving the way that we position Canada.
Then why do things keep getting worse?
Well, they may be getting worse with one country, but they might be getting better with others. And Canadians understand that we are at a hinge moment. The world is. I mean, the global trading network has been significantly shifted, and Canadians are a wise lot. They've watched this progression, and they have confidence that the Prime Minister is the right person to lead us through this time.
You're the Minister of Jobs. There are a lot of people watching tonight who are afraid that they are going to lose their jobs, and that despite what you say, about the federal government's actions, it's going to get worse with Donald Trump, as the last 72 hours have shown us. What do you say to people who are watching tonight? How much worse, as the minister who oversees jobs, do you think it's going to get for them?
Well, it's hard for me to hypothesize, and it's not even. There are sectors that are extremely hard hit, and we're seeing job losses already, and you've mentioned some of those sectors, including the auto sector, steel. I was at Algoma Steel recently announcing some support for that industry to pivot to new products and new markets. But there are other areas where we desperately need skilled tradespeople and other employees. I was just with SEIU this morning talking about a new tax credit for personal support workers. Those jobs are stable. People will always need to be cared for. So there are a number of sectors where there is a shortage of people. There are a number of sectors that are being deeply impacted. And what I would say to Canadians, to answer your question directly, is that we'll have your back no matter what sector you're in. Whether it's through the kinds of supports we're providing for companies to work share while they figure out what to do with their workforce. They don't want to lose these skilled workers, but they're also struggling with enough hours. Or whether it's EI supports for people that are laid off as a company is changing or transitioning, or in some cases leaving, or whether it's skills training on the job so that people can actually have the opportunity to adapt to new realities in their own sector. We're going to be with Canadians no matter their circumstances.
You mentioned a lot of the sort of pillars of what you're announcing today in advance of the budget, about what will be introduced in the budget to address the challenges that workers are facing. I started off by asking you about the auto sector in particular, because I think that people in that sector believe that it's on the precipice of failing, that essentially, because the White House has been so explicit about, we don't want cars made in Canada, we want them to come in second, is what Howard Lutnick said. Maybe we'll buy some parts, that the whole sector could be on the verge of collapse. Does the scale of what you're announcing today address the scope of what that sector and the hundreds of thousands of people who work in it and adjacent to it face?
Well, what I announced today wasn't specific to the job loss that people are facing in the auto sector. What I announced today was really about 4 things that specifically talk about red seal trades and attracting, promoting, and training people, getting them through the apprenticeship, supports for personal support workers to make sure that we honor and recognize people that are caring for our elders and our family members, and a number of other things. But we've already put into place the changes that I mentioned through the EI fund that allows for workplaces to utilize EI to reduce the load of their payroll so that they can keep as many people attached to their work site as possible, to support workers with longer terms of EI, to support workers who have been laid off to be able to keep all of their earnings so there's no clawback at the beginning of your EI claim. These are things that we already put into place a number of months ago and that are actually in operation right now. But that's not the end of the story, obviously, and people don't want, they want a brighter future beyond EI, and that's why the investment in skills training and ensuring that we invest in major projects, building housing, pivoting to new markets is so important.
But I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, because, for example, a new digital tool to facilitate job search, does that address, and I picked the auto sector, but there are other sectors that are worried about the immeasurable impact of a very punishing U.S. president, right? Is there enough that you're putting out there that will actually meet the moment for the tens of thousands of Canadians who are worried, not 2 years from now or 3 years from now, lots of this funding is spread over a long period of time, but tomorrow or a month from now, that they will not be able to support their families?
I was meeting with the new CEO from Thunder Bay Pulp and Paper, and he's actually a Canadian who spent a number of years in the industry down south and is now running one of the largest, if not the largest, mill in Northern Ontario, and has some fantastic ideas about how he can take that mill into being able to produce a different kind of product that has a better market both domestically and internationally. That's the kind of excitement and enthusiasm I'm actually hearing from stakeholders and sectors. There's an anxiety, absolutely, of course. I think we're all a bit of anxious when there's such a major rupture in terms of the relationship with the United States. But there is an enthusiasm amongst many leaders that there is an opportunity, if we pull together, to be able to pivot what we make, how we make it, and how fast we do that pivot. And my job as a federal minister is to work with stakeholders, whether as an MP, in the case of the individual I just mentioned, or as a minister responsible for jobs and and families, training, EI, different kinds of services for Canadians, that we are there to support Canadians. It's why things like the early learning and childcare program is so important. You know, we want to make sure that we keep affordability in the forefront and that we continue this march towards more spots at a reduced rate so that families can afford to reach their full potential. It's why we want to make sure that support workers get the kind of financial support they need to stay attached and retained in that sector so that families can have the confidence that when they go to work, their loved ones are being cared for. So there's no one piece that's more important than the other. They all work together.
I do want to touch on youth unemployment before I let you go, Minister, because it has been a huge source of anxiety for younger Canadians. And we saw that the rate of unemployment actually ended up ticking up even higher in the month of September, contrary to a stable one for the overall population. And I, in particular, wanted to ask about some comments that the Prime Minister made in his address last week in front of a group of students at the University of Ottawa, in which he essentially asked them or told them that more sacrifice could be in store. Do you understand, as the minister who oversees the file of jobs, how tone deaf that appears to young Canadians?
Yeah, I think what he was saying is that every generation has had to sacrifice in some way, and I totally understand if Canadians or young Canadians are feeling that in any way implied that they have to sacrifice more. But that is not the intent of his comments. And I would say this: he is saying that we are at a generational shift here in our relationship with the United States, in the way that the world trade is actually functioning, in the kinds of things that we'll be asked to do as communities, as individuals, and yes, as governments, to work together to protect each other during this time. And I think he's calling on that sense of pride that all of us have, that pride of our forefathers and mothers, if you will, who did that heavy lifting for us in their generation, and that it's our time to do the heavy lifting for all of us. And I think that's actually an important and realistic and optimistic message, that times have been tough before and Canadians have pulled together to get through them. And we will get through this time together again.
Aren't the times tough enough, though, for young Canadians? I mean, your government has now been in power for more than 6 months. You Liberals were in power for 10 years before. This is the highest rate of unemployment for that age group since 2010 outside of COVID. Like, have they not been asked to sacrifice enough? And if your measures that you've put in place to address this youth unemployment crisis have not even moved the needle remotely, why should Canadians trust that the other measures you're announcing today will address the wider problem?
Well, I think that, when I look at the investment in skilled trades training, for example, and having a young man in my life who is a Red Seal crane operator, to be able to go from, a laborer to making the kind of money that we see in the skilled trades is exactly the kind of investment that young people expect us to make. They want us to invest in the skills training that they will need to pick up those good jobs. They want us to make sure that we keep the programs that have made life more affordable. Many young people are parents, and affordable childcare is an affordability measure. It's also an economic measure. It allows for people to fully engage in the workforce. So these kinds of investments are generational, and I think that we have to keep pulling together. We need everyone.
This is a crisis, with all due respect. This is a crisis for young people. Nearly 15% of them are unemployed.
One of the first things I did when I was appointed early this year was to ensure that we added additional money to Canada Summer Jobs. We are looking
But it didn't help.
Well, it actually did. 6,000 more students got jobs. So I don't know if that's nobody, but I think 6,000 more jobs was a huge addition to the kinds of jobs available. We transfer about $2 billion a year to provinces and territories for skills training. A lot of that goes into work-integrated learning. And we are interested in solutions that are going to result in better attachment to the workforce. The federal government, as you know, has a youth employment strategy. We're renewing that youth employment strategy with provinces and territories. We want to make sure that what we invest is the right blend to ensure that kids have what they need to succeed.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. I've taken enough of your time. Thanks, Minister. I appreciate it very much. That's Job Minister Patty Hajdu. We'll take a quick commercial break here on Power Play. On the other end of the break, our front bench is here. Brian Gallant, Tom Mulcair, Lisa Raitt, and Rob Benzie. We've got to talk about a dramatic couple of days in Canada-U.S. relations, and we'll do just that in 2 minutes. Stay right there.
We had over 1 billion impressions. We achieved our goal, and our goal is to make sure that we get a fair deal. Not a one-sided Donald Trump deal, but a fair deal for the people of Ontario and Canada. Ontario won't be fine if we sign a lousy deal. I'd rather have no deal than a terrible deal that will cost jobs here in Ontario. Do you know why President Trump's so upset right now? Because it was effective. It was working. It woke up the whole country.
Doug Ford digging in after U.S. President Donald Trump ended trade talks and threatened fresh tariffs. Trump claims it's all over an ad the premier aired across U.S. networks that used video of Ronald Reagan arguing against protectionism. Now, Trump's representative in Canada is saying we've missed our shot at a deal anytime soon.
And there's just a lot of stuff going on, and if we don't get it by then, by Thanksgiving, it may not happen until the first of the year. So they were confident it would happen before Thanksgiving, that we would have a deal on steel, aluminum, energy, which would include both oil and uranium. Okay, so that is, that's where we were on Thursday. We have stopped negotiations with Canada.
That's Ambassador Pete Hoekstra. Even Hoekstra says that just last week, as you heard there, he thought a sectoral deal was in sight for steel and aluminum. So how did it all go so wrong? Let's bring in our front bench. Former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant is here. He's now the CEO of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is with us. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Marcy.
Good to see you. Benzie, I'll start with you just because I know I heard you there in the scrum with the Premier yelling questions at him. What is your assessment at this point of what really went wrong in this whole thing?
I mean, I think that Donald Trump was looking for a reason to withdraw America from these talks. He saw this ad a while ago. He talked about it early last week and said he would have run the same ad if he were Canada. And then Thursday night comes, he gets on Truth Social and starts tweeting maniacal things about how he's abandoning the talks because the ad is allegedly false. It's not. It quotes Ronald Reagan accurately. Ronald Reagan opposed tariffs. The reason we have a free trade agreement with the United States in the first place is because President Reagan and Prime Minister Brian Mulroney signed one in 1988. So the idea that these talks were totally derailed by a 60-second commercial that the Ontario government has been airing in the United States for the past 2 weeks seems improbable, Vashi. If the talks were going so swimmingly, they wouldn't be derailed by a pretty tame ad, all things considered. All it does is quote Ronald Reagan from a 1987 speech talking about how tariffs and protectionism can cost jobs in the United States and how it's not the way to go.
It's interesting, Tom, because on the one hand, you have the Premier of Ontario kind of defending the intent behind the ad and also indicating that the Prime Minister saw it before it went to air, the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff. On the other, you have the Prime Minister, not in so many words, but certainly in the scrum with reporters from Malaysia today, basically saying, take Trump at his word. He says it was about the ad, so it's about the ad. What does that kind of schism show you?
It shows that there's a real issue starting to brew between Prime Minister Carney and, of course, Premier Ford. And I'm keeping an eye on it because in addition to what you just mentioned, I'd point out that Prime Minister Carney went so far as to say that it was clear that he would never have considered putting up an ad like that. And there was an admonition in that. He was finger pointing a little bit softly at Ford. And then there was the second part where he added, well, actually, the people who are around the table, the people who are in the negotiating room, they know what's going on. Parenthesis. And Doug Ford doesn't know what's going on because he's not part of those negotiations. So it's warming up. the duel between Ford and Carney. I hope it doesn't go any further because, goodness sake, Canada needs both of them on the same side and going in the same direction. But it's the bit where Ford affirms. It's a strong affirmation. He affirms that Carney saw it. I'm not sure he knows that much about the Prime Minister's agenda that he can make that affirmation, unless he's got an email from Mr. Carney saying, oh, no, I've seen it. And his Chief of Staff, I'd be very surprised that he actually took the time to look at something like that. So I'm not sure where this is supposed to go right now, but I do think I'm very much on the same page as Rob. I think that this is just another excuse by a very experienced grifter named Donald Trump, who's breaking the card table because he doesn't like the hand that he has. He was going to have a deal with Canada Canada, then he's not going to have a deal. And yeah, he really didn't like having Ronald Reagan served up in his face. And there was nothing wrong with Ford's ad on that level. I took the trouble, like I'm sure a lot of other people, to listen to all 5 minutes of Reagan's speech back in '87. There was nothing in what Ontario put out that changed in any way, shape, or form what was in there. Ronald Reagan was saying tariffs are bad long term. Donald Trump doesn't do long term. He does short term. It's like, what can I get for myself now? What can today take? And let tomorrow take care of itself. That's Donald Trump. And that's what all this is about.
Do you think, Lisa, that, I mean, I don't know how we know for sure, but do you have an instinct as to whether this is about irritants like the ad, like the Stellantis and GM remission changes, or whether it's a negotiating tactic that Trump has been known to use in negotiations before, just kind of like a last-minute exit until he's ready to come back?
I think your last clip from Ambassador Hoekstra told us everything we need to know. There was a deal on the table. The Canadians did not accept it. Mr. Trump did not like that, and he warned Canadians that if you didn't take the deal as presented, you would go back to the end of the line of 94 other countries who are trying to do deals with the United States right now. And he went through with his word. I think the Prime Minister is fortunate that Doug Ford has been seized upon to be the excuse for why Mr. Trump did this, but he didn't cause it at all. What I would like to hear from the Prime Minister is, well, what was in the deal? What was in the deal that you rejected? Why did you reject it? What's our plan going forward? How much is it going to cost us in the short term? How much is it going to cost us in the long term? I can't really fault Premier Eby or Premier Ford for fighting, because there are two really big things not included in that deal: autos and forestry. So where are those? I mean, I was really hoping that that speech last Tuesday was going to lay out some of these things. We had been hearing about the rumor of a deal being imminent for many, many, many days. The Americans were talking about it, and we didn't sign off. Why? I'm sure it's good reasons, but we deserve an explanation.
I think it's an interesting point, and we've kind of talked about it in a way, right? There's been very little effort, particularly if you contrast, Brian, you know, this iteration of negotiations with the NAFTA ones all those years ago, to kind of explain to Canadians, even in a limited way, like what the overall objective is, what is even being discussed. Like we've gotten glimmers of it over the past 10 days. You know, it's sectoral. We've now conceded it's sectoral and won't be a big deal. We heard steel, aluminum, and energy. We don't hear, to Lisa's point, anything about forestry or anything about autos. Like at the end of the day, to the Premier's point, like Premier Eby and Premier Ford, like ultimately represent sectors that, you know, are asking the questions that we are right now, which is like, where is this thing at? Why did it go off the rails? Where are you hoping to take it? How long can the government continue to say, just trust us?
Yeah, a lot in there. So look, I think the idea that they are maybe not as sort of forthcoming as some would like is a very fair point. And my sense would be that they're basically taking the tact of being very quiet, very sort of factual, meaning they'll talk about things that are pretty much a certainty, other than potentially putting out that there's going to be a deadline for the trade deal this summer. But I think they probably learned from that mistake, and I think they're just being very factual. And this isn't the first time, as you mentioned a while ago, Vashi, that the president has done something like this. So I believe that they're basically just saying, okay, that's what he's doing. We just got to react and sort of, you know, keep on keeping on, basically. Now, is that the right tact? I don't know, but it's certainly the one that they have taken over the last few months. And as Tom mentioned, it's kind of like, oh, no, take the president at his word. So he's not getting baited into sort of fighting on the rhetoric. Again, is that the right approach? I suppose we'll ultimately see, but that's definitely my sense of what Carney and the team and his team are doing. In terms of Ford, I mean, I think that I'll go on a limb and say that he would be briefed a lot more than all of us, right? So I do believe that at one point Carney said, oh, I'll reach out to Premier Ford and basically brief him up on where things are at. So although your question, I think, is completely fair with regards to the sort of public-facing briefings, my sense would be that premiers and others are being led into the tent a little bit more than us. To what extent, I'm not sure. And is it enough? I don't know. But I do think we have to give them the benefit of the doubt for that. And in terms, lastly, about Ford and the ad, I mean, I agree with Benzie's, you know, I think everyone's agreed in Benzie's opening remarks. I'll just add, I mean, the idea that you latch on to a province doing something, criticizing you, and then you basically retaliate on the whole country for that is ludicrous, right? And I used the example on CTV this weekend. If Gavin Newsom or the state of California criticized Prime Minister Carney or the government of Canada, I think nobody in a million years would ever believe that it would be okay for the government of Canada or Mark Carney to say, well, I'm done with the trade talks with the U.S. because the state of California criticized us. I mean, it's really pretty ludicrous when you think about it. So to Benzie's opening remarks, I think it's clear they already had some tension. I agree with sort of Tom and Lisa's analysis. They probably had a sticking point or a few of them, and they didn't like where it was ending, and essentially they walked away because of that.
Your connection started to go out as soon as you said, I agree with Lisa and Tom. So I'll take a quick commercial break. We're all back on the other end of that break to look ahead to what may be next. Back in a moment with our front bench.
This was about a philosophical principle, a sovereignty principle, and it was never mentioned that Doug Ford and Eby were starting to play in domestic American politics, potentially affecting a Supreme Court decision, potentially affecting politics, an election that is 8 days out, and for sure having an impact in the midterm elections.
That's U.S. Ambassador Pete Huckstra accusing Canadian politicians of seeking to interfere in upcoming elections by running anti-tariff ads on American networks. Remarks delivered after U.S. President Donald Trump terminated trade talks and threatened new 10% tariffs on Canada. Despite that, Prime Minister Mark Carney says he does not favor retaliation.
The reality is that Canada was one of only 2 countries that had retaliatory tariffs on. So everybody had focus, but only 2 countries had those in place. And the value of those retaliations was diminishing. So we took the decision, we stand by it in terms of taking those down, taking those off, and then we made the progress that we did.
And Donald Trump isn't interested in movement.
The Prime Minister knew what the end was before it went.
Will you see him in APEC? Do you want to meet with him?
I don't want to meet with him. No, I'm not going to be meeting with him for a while. No, I'm very happy with the deal we have right now with Canada. We're going to let it ride.
So what happens next? Let's bring back our front bench, Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Lisa, you heard the Prime Minister kind of talk a little bit about the posture that they've taken so far in response even to this latest kind of threat of additional tariffs. How tenable is that position?
I'm more worried about the president saying we're going to let it ride. I mean, I feel like it's a really bad poker game at this point in time. And that's kind of where we are. And unfortunately, the table stakes are a lot of people's houses and jobs and serious economic impacts. So I think we can take it at face value that the Americans are going to be difficult to get back to the table. And in that absence, the Prime Minister has to figure out the best way to get the economy running in the short, medium, and long term. So everything now swivels and points very focused wise on his budget on November 4, his competitive climate paper, and on his defense procurement strategy. All of this stuff is going to come out by Christmas. None of it's going to be done very easily, but it's going to have to get going because we are now in the hands of President Donald Trump as to when he wants to recommence negotiations. And even if he does, it looks like 2 of our big sectors, in being auto and forestry, are left out of the mix.
Brian, let's take the first of those 3 things Lisa pointed to in the budget. A week from tomorrow, it'll be tabled in the House of Commons. How do you expect, or how should we expect, what has just taken place to inform what we hear from the Prime Minister? And not even as much from a content perspective, but from a communications perspective.
Right. It's an interesting question because I'm fascinated by the speed in which they're doing this, and not necessarily that they hadn't had a few months to get her done, but obviously with the idea that they got elected, there's all that sort of, let's call it what is, a bit of chaos as you're trying to staff up, you're trying to figure everything out as you're sort of getting running as a government, which is completely normal. So the idea of kind of putting a budget together in the climate that we're in, given all of that and being a new Prime Minister It'll be interesting to see exactly where they land with it all. And of course, to your point on the sort of substance, I mean, my sense would be that you're just going to hear a lot of the same. I think you're going, and not that that's necessarily bad or good, but I think it's the idea that Prime Minister Carney and his government will talk about we need to diversify. We need to go and build some big things in this country to be able to really get our sort of our house in order, as one would say. We need to ensure that we bust down some internal trade, things like that he can control. It'll be tough to see a budget where we all want to see something happen with the trade conflict, but that's just not something, as Lisa pointed out, that they control. So they're going to try to put in some things in there that will make some sense to Canadians as a thoughtful response to the situation we find ourselves in. And then, of course, not necessarily related to your question, but we are going to see, I believe, some expenditure reductions with regards to the civil service and some other programming. So it'll be interesting to see how they sort of bring all that into one theme about we need to do this to sort of deal with the new reality that we're facing with this trade conflict and it continuing longer than anyone would like to see.
Sort of what Brian said makes me think of the address, I think Lisa pointed out in the last round, Tom, that the Prime Minister gave last week. Like, if it's more of that, and that is the communication and the messaging around the budget, is that enough to meet the moment for Canadians?
No, it's definitely not. And they've been using terminology that is usually considered kryptonite by politicians, going after the word austerity and using it to describe what you're going to do. Austerity equals very hard times for the average working family. The trick of trying to separate out the investment part, these infrastructures, this infrastructure spending, this just in, government spending is government spending. Deficits are deficits. That's the way the rating agencies count them, because that's the reality of it. So we are in tough economic times. It has everything to do with the Americans, but I do think that at some point we've got to remember that if they were sitting down at that table with our negotiators for that whole time, it's because there's a lot of stuff that they want as well. And sure, Trump's playing Trump. He is an experienced, skilled negotiator, and he's using every trick that he has in his book. But at some point, there's a lot of stuff that they want as well. The Americans have been conned by Trump on the tariffs. Try to tell an American that it's the average consumer paying the 50% on softwood lumber, they won't understand it. But if you tell them that most of the lumber that gets sold in the United States comes from Canada, it's now sold with a 50% tariff, and the cost of the home that they're trying to build has just gone up $50,000 or $75,000, then they'll start getting it. But even there, Trump has come up with alternative facts because he's named a new person in charge of coming up with economic statistics for the states. There is inflation there, as there is here. It's growing. Trump is going to try to hide it. That's why he's so angry about this bit about Ronald Reagan's speech that was not tampered with by Doug Ford. I have to say, if you don't mind, Vashti, that there's one thing in that intervention by Pete Hoekstra that made me just howl with laughter as a lawyer. To say that a 60-second ad with vital, essential, true clips from Ronald Reagan is going to influence the United States Supreme Court is frankly laughable. So when you're down to that level of malarkey, and I have other words that I can substitute for that, you know that you're playing a game.
Benzie, are you hearing anything? I thought it was interesting, just jumping off that point, that today the Premier in Ontario indicated that he didn't think that extra 10% that Donald Trump was threatening would actually come to fruition. Like, are you hearing anything there about what they think will happen? Did they anticipate at the provincial level that there will be, that those discussions or negotiations will resume anytime soon?
No, I mean, there was no executive order written on Air Force One, even on the back of a napkin, Vashti. So, and as Patty Haidu told you earlier, they don't have any details. Well, neither does Premier Ford or anyone in the Ontario government. I mean, this is the problem when we live in this era of Twitter or Truth Social or whatever you want to call it, whatever medium Trump is using. It's just reactive and petulant, and it's, every little brain fart that comes into your head goes on out in the world. If you can say that on television, I apologize if you can't. But it is just bizarre to me that it's just bizarre to me though that we take these tweets as the law. Well, I mean, it's amazing. The United States Congress does have some say in matters. The U.S. Supreme Court is going to have some say in matters. It's clear to me that Mr. Trump is rankled and rattled about that, about the ad, because he's worried about what the Supreme Court's going to say. And I mean, to Tom's point, if you're a Supreme Court justice, you're one of those 9 justices looking at the case, what is the emergency exactly? What is the reason for these tariffs? The petulance of one man. And he proved it by saying, I'm adding another 10%, which he probably won't end up doing, but I'm adding another 10% because I didn't like a 60-second commercial aired by a province called Ontario in Canada. It's insane.
It may be, but at the same time, even when it comes to the Supreme Court, Lisa, like that is going to rule on the reciprocal tariffs, and those are the ones Congress is supposed to have some say over. He still has the ability, as he has done with the 232 ones, to add layers onto that if he wants, even if the Supreme Court decides against him, which is a big question mark at this point. Yes, I think it's right to say that he's definitely worried, but we don't know for sure what the outcome of that is going to be. By all that, I mean to say, like, I don't think all of a sudden the tariffs are about to disappear, even if there's 50 decisions against him.
No, I don't think so at all. I also worry about the USMCA, the CUSMA. Where is that in all of it? And how does that play out? That's a big one for us. That's still in activity. And that's a good talking point for the Prime Minister, quite frankly. He gets to say that 85% of our goods are covered under a free trade agreement. You lose that, you've got some really big problems. So it's kind of difficult trying to follow the bouncing ball on what's happening here. But I think I'm going to go back to it again. The government owes us an explanation at this point in time. There's a lot of angst out there in society.
Do you think that that's coming anytime soon, Brian? Last word to you.
Well, look, I think the budget will serve as a strong communication tool. People tune in when there's something significant like a budget. So that could very well be a great opportunity to do what Lisa's suggesting and giving a better sense of what's happening behind the scenes. I mean, obviously, I think we all understand they can only do that to some extent. And on top of that, I would add, especially with this administration, as they seem, as Benzie pointed out, to take things so personally. But nevertheless, Canadians still deserve to have a sense of what's going on. And the budget could serve as a great sort of opportunity, whether it's the day of or the days that follow, when you're sort of talking about what things you're enacting because of the climate we find ourselves in through the budget.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the discussion. Our front bench, Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. We'll take a quick commercial break. On the other end of that break, we'll head over to Malaysia. That's where Prime Minister Carney is. He's on a multi-day tour of Asia, trying to advance discussions to diversify trade partners. We'll get a readout of how that's actually going from our reporter on the ground, CTV's Judy Trend, next. Welcome back to Power Play and continuing coverage of our top story, which for the Prime Minister is playing out on the other side of the world. 5 days after U.S. President Donald Trump terminated trade negotiations with Canada, the Prime Minister answered questions about how or if talks could resume and if they should. CTV's Judy Trinh is traveling with the Prime Minister in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. She joins us with the latest. Judy?
Vashi, basically getting negotiations on track depends on the mercurial Donald Trump. The Prime Minister revealed that he has not spoken to the U.S. President since he broke off talks last Thursday. Mark Carney also said that the sudden halt in talks came just as the government was close to announcing some relief on tariffs on steel and aluminum. Trump terminated the negotiations over an anti-tariff ad that the Ontario government commissioned. Now, Vashi, Carney was asked if he was upset with Premier Doug Ford. Here's what he said.
You can get unexpected twists and turns, and you have to keep your cool during those situations. It doesn't pay to be upset. Emotions don't carry you very far. And we had made progress, to repeat. And we stand by the progress that had been made.
Carney said the government has considered the possibility that the U.S. is toying with Canada and that Trump doesn't really want to negotiate. Carney says there is a contingency plan for that, and part of that plan involves investing in nation-building projects and reducing reliance on the U.S. by diversifying trade. At ASEAN, Carney said that Canada plans to double its non-U.S. exports over the next decade, and that countries in Southeast Asia could get a large chunk of the $300 billion in investment. As an example, Carney pointed to a letter of intent signed by the Malaysian government along with Canada and the energy giant Petronas to deepen investment in liquefied natural gas, one of Canada's major projects. Carney said he would also be meeting China's President Xi Jinping in a few days at the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference in South Korea. Donald Trump will also be there, but has said that he has no intention of sitting down with Carney. I asked the Prime Minister how their relationship, which just a month ago seemed so warm and friendly, went south so fast. Vashi, how did Carney respond? He answered in a very short sentence. That's a question for Trump. Vashi.
All right. Thanks so much, Judy. That's our Judy Trin reporting from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. That news that she delivered around that meeting that President Carney will take with President Xi will certainly be very significant toward the end of the week. Remember, it's the Chinese ambassador who on CTV said that if Canada removes tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles, China will do a quid pro quo and remove tariffs on a whole host of agricultural products, including canola, which China has hit incredibly hard. We'll take a quick break here on Power Play, back with the latest from Alberta and the teacher strike there. Welcome back to Power Play. A couple of things to keep your eyes on as we head into the evening and throughout the rest of the week. First, we'll swing over to Edmonton, Alberta, and a live look at the legislature there. We are anticipating any moment, as soon as the shot broadens out, whenever that does happen, that the Alberta government is expected to table some sort of legislation that would, in essence, force teachers who have been on strike now for 3 weeks there back to work. There's a couple of things to note around that. First of all, there are 51,000 teachers who have been on strike for these 3 weeks, 750,000 students in Alberta impacted by this. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has been up for debate or a back and forth between the government and the union here. But ultimately, the provincial government did say when the legislature resumed today that they did intend to introduce legislation to bring teachers back to work. Again, we don't know the full content of that legislation. There is something called Bill 2 on the order paper. So we await the introduction of that to be able to convey to you the details of it. But that is certainly something to keep your eye on. We are anticipating there will be large union reaction in Alberta as well. And we will carry any of that as it happens on our watch this evening and be sure to convey it to you as it does. I'll leave Power Play there. I'm Vashi Capellos. Thanks for watching.